Now come to our main item in the program. We have, as you would know, the main theme of our anniversary lecture is Problems of Democracy in Ghana's Fourth Republic. And the keynote speaker is Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, who will be making a presentation titled The Crisis of Civic Citizenship in Contemporary Ghanaian Democracy, Lessons from the Life and Times of the late Akoto Ampaw. Professor Prempeh is the Executive Director of the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, CDD Ghana, and Project Director for West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network, a regional democracy defense network bringing together over 40 of West Africa's leading civil society actors. Professor Prempeh was previously a professor of law at Seton Hall University School of Law in New Jersey, the United States of America. He was also a constitutional advisor to the UN Special Envoy to Yemen, and an attorney with international law firms in Washington, D.C., all before he took the position of Executive Director of the CDD. He is currently a Richard von Weizsäcker Fellow at the Robert Bosch Academy in Berlin, in Germany. This is a brief biography highlighting some of the key activities Professor Prempeh has engaged himself in. He's a very prolific writer also on questions of democracy and human rights. So, ladies and gentlemen, I present Professor Prempeh to you.
Good morning. The Chair, Professor Kwame Kakari, and friends of Akoto Ampaw, the family of Akoto Ampaw, distinguished compatriots present here, and I see a good number. Ladies and gentlemen, greetings. May I first and foremost commend the friends of Akoto Ampaw for seeing it fit and proper it is, to organize this first anniversary public lecture to remember and celebrate the life, work, and legacy of our dear friend, brother, and compatriot, citizen Akoto Ampaw, more popularly known as Sheshe or simply She, whose passing a year to the day this past Sunday, October 20th, left us all heartbroken. The organization that I'm privileged to lead, the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, CDD, was one of Sheshe's closest institutional friends and civil society allies. And we feel greatly honored to have been invited by friends of Akoto Ampaw to partner with them and with the Institute of African Affairs, University of Ghana, to organize this first anniversary public lecture in honor of Akoto Ampaw. I believe I speak for my colleagues at CDD, including the members of the board, when I say that the center would be glad and proud to have this idea and this collaboration with Friends of Akoto Ampaw properly institutionalized and made an annual affair going forward, thus giving birth, that is, to an annual Akoto Ampaw Memorial Lecture. Speaking in a more personal capacity, I feel deeply honored to have been chosen by Friends of Akoto Ampaw to deliver this first anniversary public lecture in honor of Sheshe. Sheshe was indeed a big brother and a very dear friend, but compared to all of the big brothers and big sisters in the pantheon of compatriots that have now constituted themselves into the Friends of Akoto Ampaw, I was a rather late comer to the party. Having met and come to know and share the company of Akoto Ampaw only during the last, perhaps a decade and a half or 2 decades or so of his post-teen life, spanning some 6 decades. But better late than never, for I am grateful beyond measure that Sheshe's path and mine did eventually cross, and in ways that have been profoundly enriching for me. Like so many of you here today, I do miss Sheshe very dearly, especially at a time such as this, when our nation appears rudderless and its nominally representative and other public institutions and the political classes increasingly disconnected from the everyday realities of the people and unable to inspire confidence about the future. I knew Akoto Ampaw by reputation long before we met in person. And when we did eventually meet, sometime in the mid-2000s, it was through our shared interest in helping as best we could to think and work through some of the problems and challenges of democracy in Ghana's Fourth Republic. It is therefore appropriate that the organizers of this first anniversary lecture in his honor would choose as its theme the problems of democracy in Ghana's Fourth Republic. Akoto Ampaw indeed spent a great deal of his time working to get our democracy and its institutions to work and to serve the needs and interests of all of its citizens. A cosmopolitan, a citizen of the world that is, and a lifelong Pan-Africanist whose belief in and commitment to equality and social justice traverse the boundaries of race, nationality, ethnicity, gender, and class. Akoto Ampaw's world and work extended well beyond the shores of his homeland, Ghana. His activism on behalf of the causes he believed in date back to the 1970s when he worked tirelessly in the All Africa Students Movement. As a man not only of thought, but of action, Akoto Ampaw thought globally. But being also a practical man, he acted primarily locally. Home then, Ghana that is, was the principal site of Akoto's civic engagement and activism for the better part of his life. Thus, in looking at the problems of contemporary Ghanaian democracy from the prism of citizenship or the engaged citizen, I think it is equally befitting that we should turn for inspiration, as the sub-theme or topic of this lecture does, to Akoto's life as a citizen and appreciate the myriad ways in which he sought as citizen to make Ghana and Ghana's democracy better for all, as well as the constraints he had to navigate and the sacrifices he endured in the process. But before we return to Akoto's illustrious life of engaged citizenship, let us take stock first, but briefly, of the state of Ghana's democracy or democratic project 30-something years into the journey, and what that means for citizenship and the practice of citizenship in today's Ghana. To the outside world, Ghana is indeed a democracy exemplar, an African case of steady, successful democratization, a model, if you will. We owe this accolade, this enviable brand image, to a combination of the turbulent neighborhood we happen to be situated in and the tumultuous political history from which we ourselves have emerged as a country. In a neighborhood that has witnessed multiple recent instances of democratic collapse, as manifested by the return of military juntas in Guinea, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, a neighborhood where leaders continue to evade or scheme to remove presidential term limit provisions so as to prolong their stay in office, where a career as an opposition politician could be a high-risk proposition, endangering one's very life. Ghana indeed stands tall as an oasis of stable, steady, democratic progress since the country returned to constitutional democracy in January 1993. This progress is made more remarkable against the backdrop of a post-independent national history marked by successive failed attempts at institutionalizing democratic government, each past attempt terminated after only a few short years by a coup d'etat, leaving the country with no history of a peaceful change of government through the ballot box before January 2001. Over the course of the decades and through a succession of over the course of the 3 decades since January 1993, and through a succession of regularly scheduled general elections, Ghana's democracy has evolved to become a highly competitive two-party system with the National Democratic Congress, NDC, and New Patriotic Party, NPP, taking turns in government in intervals of 8 years, 2001, 2009, 2017, and we await the next elections in a month or so. Election results, where they have been disputed, have been settled by the parties concerned through constitutionally prescribed judicial processes. Furthermore, a 2-term limit on presidential tenure and provisions for civilian control of the military, both important safeguards enshrined in the 1992 Constitution, enjoy broad public and cross-party support. Afrobarometer surveys show Ghanaians as consistently supportive of presidential term limits and opposed to all non-democratic forms of government, including military rule and one-party rule, by very high supermajorities. In short, then, the country's strong brand image appears well earned. The product, however, is an altogether different story. In terms of the rules of entry and exit, or how orderly the country chooses and changes its leaders and government, Ghana indeed scores high marks. However, once a government is in office, the rules of play, or how well the country is governed, and how public power and resources are used to address public problems, if at all, have remained chronically underwhelming and disappointing. In the interest of time, I will draw on only 3 examples to illustrate this problem. One from the economy, and I think Professor Kwame Kakari actually did make mention to some of the challenges. The second example will be drawn from a dysfunctional feature of the constitutional system we operate, and the third from a perennial public problem that has defied solution despite successive changes of government. Ghana is in the final weeks of a crucial election year. This is happening at a time of exceptional economic angst amongst the population. The country is in the midst of its first ever sovereign debt default, and once again under some form of adult supervision by the IMF. The 17th time we have had to make recourse to the IMF since independence, and I believe the 6th time since the return to democratic government in 1993. This historic sovereign debt default has been accompanied by hyperinflation, which reached as high as 50 plus 2 years ago, and currently hovers around 25%, as well as haircuts on domestic investments by Ghanaians holding government bonds. But you wouldn't know any of this if you follow the candidates and their song and dance election campaigns across the country. On the campaign trail, you continue to hear promise upon promise of whatever needs to be said to win an election. What you will not hear is discussion of how to break the stranglehold of debt, of Eurobond debt, or the habit of IMF recidivism in which we are caught. No way out of the economic cul-de-sac. Just more Kool-Aid from the political parties and their candidates. After all, when push comes to shove, those we elect to run our public affairs, and for that matter, our economy, will, especially if a general election is on the horizon, simply turn to external managers we have never elected and cannot hold to account to step in again with a bailout and to steer the sinking economic ship back to safe harbor, albeit only temporarily. Constitutional system, we continue to have hold on to a persistent colonial era model of local government, or better, local administration, characterized by a national elite paternalism towards local communities. No different from during the colonial period when the colonial authorities, represented by the governor, dealt with our local communities, the natives, so to speak, with an air of superiority and paternalism. So, 30-something years into democratic rule, our president, a lineal descendant of the colonial governor, continues to nominate and appoint the mayors or chief executives of all administrative districts across the country. Despite strong popular demand for local governments to elect their own chief executives, no supply has been forthcoming from the national elites at the center. A constitutional referendum originally scheduled for late 2019 was called off at the last minute by presidential fiat because the two parliamentary parties, the sole gatekeepers of constitutional revision under Ghana's elite-friendly constitution, could not reconcile their rival partisan preferences in the interest of the collective good. Thus, thanks to persistent elite inertia and an unwillingness to reach consensus on a critical piece of constitutional reform to democratize local government and empower local communities to take charge of their own affairs, our electoral democracy remains Accra-centered. The third example of our democracy's apparent inability to solve critical public problems comes from the story of Galamsey, or illegal artisanal mining. Again, despite the scale and gravity of the devastation this widespread practice is causing to the country's ecology, water supply systems, and long-term public health, resolute action has not been forthcoming from the political classes. And here, they do not even pretend to conceal their self-serving reasons for not acting resolutely to stop the ecocide. If they did, they tell us, they risk losing votes in the illegal artisanal mining communities to their political rivals. Therefore, for the sake of their own political careers and partisan agendas, the ecocide and related adverse public health consequences must continue. And we are told this to our faces. Our democracy has been turned against us. Instead of a government of the people, by the people, for the people, we have ended up, it appears, with a government of the party, by the party, for the party, and its partisans. How to change this picture? This is where citizenship enters the equation. I think from Plato to Alexis de Tocqueville to Kofi Annan, political philosophers, statesmen, students of politics, all have noted long noted the indispensable role of an engaged citizenry or civic engagement in changing the course and quality of public affairs and government. Permit me to just cite a few from these best people that I've mentioned. Plato says, the punishment which the wise suffer who refuse to take part in government is to live under the rule of worse men, emphasizing the very importance of public participation, civic engagement. De Tocqueville says, the health of a democratic society may be measured by the quality of functions performed by its private citizens. Right? So what citizens do in a democracy has a direct effect on the quality of democracy that they are likely to enjoy, says Alexis de Tocqueville. And our own Kofi Annan had this to say, if there is enough noise, enough pressure, enough organization, the leaders will follow the people. If the people are apathetic, they don't vote, they are leaving the field wide open to the politicians to do what they want. So then, what is to be done? What have we been doing or not doing right? Because I believe that when you look through the record, and we will share some of the evidence, it appears that we vote in very high numbers, probably above average globally, and certainly on the continent. So what is it that has been lacking? What are the choices and options and opportunities and tools available to us as citizens that we might use to change the narrative that I have just presented? The most obvious form of civic engagement is, of course, voting. And God knows that Ghanaians love to vote. Afrobarometer tells us that when asked about the one civic activity that they had participated in the last year, Ghanaians since 2008, roughly around 75+% of Ghanaians said they voted in the last election. So there's very high level of public participation when it comes to voting. Not so other forms of participation, especially when asked, when did you last participate in a demonstration or protest? 5% in 2022, from 4% in 2012. The peak was around 15% in 2019. Perhaps we can gain some insights from the late economist and social scientist Albert Hirschman and his influential work, Exit, Voice and Loyalty, Responses to Decline in Firms, Organizations and States. What Hirschman sought to do or answer in this very influential book, Exit, Voice and Loyalty, is how we might respond as citizens of a state, consumers of a product, or members of an organization to a sustained decline or retrogression in the quality of the service or satisfaction or value we receive from that state, from that government, from that firm, from that market, or from that organization to which we belong. Hirschman organizes these various options into three. You can exit, that is, express your dissatisfaction by just withdrawing your support or patronage. If it's possible, you could switch. If there's only you've been patronizing one line of service, you could switch to the alternative if there is a suitable one available. You could also quit entirely, just sit on the fence, just basically lose interest. And you could literally vote with your feet by migrating. And Ghanaians do some of all of this. Secondly, he says, you can resort to voice. You can resort to voice, by which Hirschman means you can become engaged or more engaged, deploying various active options or forms of civic engagement in an attempt to stimulate, provoke, influence, or cause change in the desired direction. Then there is loyalty. That's his third option. When you are in your loyalty mode, well, you have pretty much resigned yourself to fate, so to speak. It's more like the do-nothing different option. You put up with the bad service or governance and ride out the bad times in the hope and expectation, at best, that things would get better. Hirschman did not use these as mutually exclusive categories, though in his view, the only two options that counted, because they both sought to cause a change in the decline one was experiencing, were exit and voice. Didn't count loyalty as very effective. And of voice, Hirschman calls voice the political action par excellence and a residual of exit because, as he writes, and I quote, it is the only way in which dissatisfied customers or members can react whenever the exit option is unavailable. So when you are stuck in the system, when you can't quit it, when you can't leave it, Hirschman says you have nothing else but voice. Few people I know have explored and deployed as full a range of voice options in their lives as citizens as Akoto Ampaw did in his life. Neither exit, quitting, nor loyalty, keeping silent on doing nothing in the face of a deteriorating or bad situation, seemed available or attractive as options for citizen Akoto Ampaw. Let me just run through the various ways in which Akoto Ampaw tried to exert voice. And note that in this framework, in Hirschman's framework, voting, any form of public participation counts. Right? So voting is also voice. So of course, I never went into the, polling booth with Akoto Ampaw, but I knew that he was a very civic-minded person, and he would vote. When I encountered him the first time, though, it was interesting. It was as a community organizer, and this was even before the transition to democracy. So some workers working for Ghana, GTP, I forgot exactly the words, in my neighborhood in Tema, there was this guy who was a GTP worker, trade unionist, who was quite interested in the politics of the moment under PNDC. And when I would come from college, from university on vacation, he would come by and engage me in all kinds of conversations about politics, Marxism and the like. He had a lot of choice words that I had never heard. I was a business student. So he would come with words like comprador and all of those. I'm like, what's comprador? So that became his nickname, when we saw each other say comprador, comprador. And I would ask him, where are you getting all these very fanciful ideas? Then he would say, oh, do you know Sheshe? I said, no, I don't know Sheshe. Do you know Yal Graham? I said, no, I don't know these people. I mean, they probably belong in a different camp than I am a business student. I'm trying to make money. So that is the first time I heard about Akoto Ampaw. And my very good friend Porsche, called him Posh, he would sing their praises and talk eloquently about it. But Akoto Ampaw at the time, then what I learned was that he belonged in this group that would come to the industrial area of Tema and meet with workers in their workplaces and educate them about politics, about rights, labor rights, and all of those things, right? So he was more or less what we would call a community organizer. That's the first act of citizenship of Akoto Ampaw that I recall having encountered just by reputation. Then, of course, he was a lawyer, right? Now, being a lawyer by itself doesn't make you a civic-minded person. We should know that, right? And in fact, Akoto Ampaw did work for a firm you would call a commercial law firm. Almost all law firms in Ghana are commercial law firms, really. That's how they make their bread and butter. But even in his law firm, and to many of us who encountered him in his capacity as a lawyer, Akoto Ampaw was very much a public interest lawyer at heart. So he was very much involved in causes that normally, garden variety lawyers would not take because it made them no money. So he represented a lot of causes in the courts as a litigator. He also advised, the first, Radio Eye, the emergence of Radio Eye as a private broadcast station. When you read the history, Akoto Ampaw's name appears there. A number of libel and sedition cases in the Supreme Court from 1993 to 1996. He was there representing journalists and others. We later encounter him in election petitions, right? Representing his client, representing his law partner, the current president, in his presidential election petitions. But it's a very interesting thing to note about Akoto is that while he did participate in politics, and sometimes on behalf of persons whose politics he may not have shared, or even if he shared them, I would joke sometimes with you and say, me, I'm not MP. But, even if he was MP, he said, but I'm not a foot soldier. He was never a partisan. Akoto Ampaw was a patriot, and when he did politics as a patriot. He was not a partisan. He was a protester par excellence. All right? Kumi Prekon, we remember him for his role with the Alliance for Change in Kumi Prekon. But actually, I remember him just going on a routine anti-corruption march with us through the streets of Accra on, I think, anti-corruption day or one of those events. And he was with a lot of young people from CDD. He was wearing his red stuff, carrying. We walked all the way from, I think, Kwame Nkrumah Circle to El Wak Stadium, and he did the distance with us. This is during the time when his law partner and friend was president. So Akoto Ampaw, for him, this was civic responsibility, right? And Akoto Ampaw was actually a candidate for elective office. That's one of the acts of participation, of citizenship. Running for office. Akoto Ampaw actually ran for political office. Most of us don't know that. He doesn't like to talk about that. He didn't like to talk much about that. But I don't know how badly he lost. But he did lose the election on the ticket of the Convention People's Party. I think it was the 1996 elections in this home constituency. And he was also available for public service, but not in the ways in which we have come to understand them. Akoto Ampaw did not seek public service just because a person had been elected that he knew he would not go lobby for a job. In fact, some of the jobs that the public service engagements he got, I'm sure, were because others were not lobbying for them. Because I remember that I served with him on the Law Reform Commission, 2 terms, and it was one of the least remunerative positions you could get. There was no queue to be on the Law Reform Commission, actually. And the interesting thing about his service on the Law Reform Commission, as I recall, is that in the second term, which is this current term, where he was our chair, he was absent on grounds of ill health. And yet he read our minutes and followed the agenda, and there was one particular issue we're considering. A codification of the defamation, the common law of defamation was being codified. Akoto Ampaw, of course, being a very strong free speech advocate and a friend of the media, had taken a very keen interest in this. I remember from the previous commission on which I served as well. And he sent in a note to the chairperson in his absence, acting chair in his absence, that he felt very strongly about a certain proposal in the draft, which would have expanded the scope of the law of defamation to codify and judicialize, for that matter, everyday insults. Right? And Akoto Ampaw thought, that's weird. The Law Reform Commission's job, in his view, was to promote the progressive development of the law, not to go in a regressive direction. And in any case, and this view was shared by some of us on the commission with him, the judicial forum was not the appropriate place to take everyday insults and things of that nature. That we had much more important things to worry about than that. So, and he made his position very, very clear. He had already made that position in a memorandum that he had done for, I think, the Media Foundation for West Africa to the first commission. And that had a big influence on why the process stalled, because we got the same proposal in the first commission, but the process stalled largely because of the objections and some of the reservations raised in Akoto Ampaw's memo on behalf of the Media Foundation. He also served on the National Media Commission. It's a constitutional body that is supposed to safeguard the independence of the media against governmental encroachment, and Akoto Ampaw did serve on the National Media Commission. These were all part-time roles because he continued his career as a lawyer. And I also, in fact, thanks to former Attorney General here, Gloria Akufo, he and I were invited to assist and advise the Attorney General in 2017 in representing Ghana against Cote d'Ivoire in our international maritime boundary case, which took us in the company of the Attorney General to various places, to London, to Hamburg, to represent the government and the people of Ghana. And Akoto Ampaw was there. Spent long nights doing drafts and edits and the like, and rehearsing speeches with the Attorney General, who was the agent of the government of Ghana in that case, which we won resoundingly, bringing more oil money, but I don't think Akoto got any of that. Akoto was also an advisor and a friend of civil society in many, 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 many different ways. CDD, we got pro bono legal advice from him on a number of issues, especially labor-related issues. If we thought that we wanted to make a decision and we thought that we wanted to make sure that we crossed our T's and dotted our I's and not got in trouble with the law, we would have Akoto Ampaw counsel us on how to handle it. Star Ghana Foundation, before that, Star Ghana, before it was a foundation, he's been with them, through the initial stages. Media Foundation for West Africa, he was a strong advisor to the trade unions, right? In many ways, the labor movement was one of the closest friends of Akoto Ampaw. And then he was just the regular citizen, without any particular portfolio, right? Citizen without portfolio. So he became, when the anti-LGBT bill was introduced, we at CDD led a number of civil society organizations, a few of them, spontaneously, to put together a coalition, a human rights coalition, to oppose the bill. We held meetings. We then put together a memorandum stating our objections to the bill that we then were getting ready to present to Parliament. Unbeknownst to us, Akoto Ampaw had also organized a separate group of citizens, not CDD, not an institution, just private individuals. And I think a few days or maybe just the night or two before we submitted our memorandum to Parliament, here Akoto Ampaw shows up at the office with a draft of their own memorandum of this group, the Big 18, we came to call them, which essentially, raising roughly some of the same objections and more that the CDD Human Rights Coalition memorandum was also raising about the bill. And this again was very spontaneous. We had in fact, no inkling that he had made that move, but he became the de facto leader of that group of 18. And the WhatsApp platform that was formed to encourage deliberation within the group has outlived Akoto Ampaw, and we continue to have close chats and other interesting conversations on that memo. On the day that the memo was heard in Parliament, before the Committee of Parliament, I presented on behalf of CDD Ghana and the coalition, and Akoto Ampaw presented on behalf of the Big 18 on the floor of Parliament. He was also a very strong public voice. Some of the images we've seen of him standing on the podium and talking. He appeared before, he was available to appear before, news and public affairs programs on TV, on radio. I remember co-authoring a couple of op-ed pieces with him in the Graphic about some matters that we were both concerned with. So you see that from the entire spectrum, this is a very wide spectrum of acts of citizenship. These are all acts of active citizenship, public engagement, trying to change the course of affairs, using all the tools at one's disposal, right? I remember when, and a lot of this is just a labor of love, right? There isn't anything, there was no remuneration attached to much of this task. I remember when a young woman who had otherwise qualified to be admitted to the bar was denied admission on the basis of some things that she had posted about herself on social media. That's liberal democracy in Ghana for you. And this was by the judicial establishment. I mean, basically the gatekeepers of admission to the bar. I didn't know that they were snooping around people's Facebook pages to see, if you describe yourself as gay or whatever, then they will say, in this particular instance, that was the crime, actually. So she said, well, no, you can't belong to the bar. And then, of course, Akoto Ampaw shot to action on her behalf. I remember I was late somewhere in Dakar, I think, when he said, we have to put something together, a statement together to go before the General Legal Council. And, Akoto Ampaw doesn't do social media or any of these things. So I shot into action, did some, research online, finding some cases and whatever. And this is late in the night. I think it was, Dakar time, which is probably the same time here, past midnight. And completely thankless job. I mean, he was basically doing this so that he could represent. But she wouldn't get any representation. No lawyer was willing to represent her. So we were approached, and then, of course, our first point of call was Akoto Ampaw, and he took the case, right? So this is how, in my view, this is how Akoto Ampaw exemplified active citizenship in these various ways, litigating in the courts, trying to get into public office by election, if not accepting the appropriate appointment to make change and influence some decisions that were being made by public commissions and others. Representing clients on cases that will affect the direction of the law. That's some of the big precedents in our constitutional evolution from 1993 and to about 1998 or 2000 were actually hatched in the Akufo-Addo law firm, and Akoto Ampaw was a key pillar of all of those processes. So this is what, in my little review, has told me about how Akoto Ampaw exercised voice under Hirschman's formulation. Exit was not an option for him, neither was loyalty, as Hirschman defines it, because in Hirschman's definition, remember, it's resigning yourself to fate, so to speak, the do nothing different mode, just wait and see and pray, which is in fact a common mode of civic engagement, if you could call it that, in the Ghanaian context. Of course, the Hirschman framework, naturally encounters challenges and reveals its limitations when you insert it into the contemporary Ghanaian context. Still, I believe that applying it as an analytical tool helps us understand the complex and severe crisis that face civic engagement and active citizenship in Ghana today. So let's begin with exit. Remember, under Hishman's formulation, exit is where you withdraw your support or patronage of a deteriorating product or service, like a boycott, essentially, right? So it's some form of engagement because you are no longer actively supporting that cause in the hope and expectation that by withdrawing your support, it would affect patronage for the service, and then whoever is providing it, government, business, whatever, would alter their behavior, fix the product, do something better. Now, when you insert it into our system, how does it look like? We operate a two-party, a duopoly, right? A duopolistic political system in a highly polarized winner-take-all political culture. How does exit look like in that kind of a context, right? So exit occurs in a variety of ways. Dissatisfied citizens or voters can switch between parties. But ours being duopolistic, it means that the choice, practically speaking, I mean, there are 13 or so people on the ballot. I think if the Electoral Commission was more diligent and scrupulous, there would be fewer. One has to wonder why we have the numbers that we keep having on the ballot every election year, when in fact some of the requirements for being a party, separate from independent candidate, clearly you and I know most of these so-called parties on the ballot do not meet it. But there is folklore about why it is that they are on the ballot. And it is basically as proxies for one or the other of these two parties, for the purpose of influencing decision-making at the IPAC, is the theory that I hear. But when you have a duopoly, exit makes sense. Switching makes sense only if there is substantial product differentiation. See, I told you I went to business school here, so my language is mostly marketing. I once sold cigarettes. That was my first job after leaving university. And we differentiated our brand 555 from Rothmans. And my father would tell you there was a difference because he smoked, right? So if there is product differentiation, you have a duopoly and the alternative is really different and offers you a different value proposition, then you could actually then switching as a form of exit makes sense. However, where the rival parties look or do alike alternatives, or where the alternative is scary for some, merry for the other, but pretty much the same for the everyday Ghanaian, then we are left with a choiceless democracy. A democracy where changing and switching parties and faces leads to no discernible improvement in the quality of government or of democracy. This, I would argue, describes the contemporary Ghanaian situation, where successive party turnover in government has changed little about how and for whose benefit this country is governed. As a matter of fact, there isn't a whole lot of switching going on between the two rival parties. For a vast majority of Ghanaians, that is not even on the table. Right? Heshman's framework appears to assume that the choices citizens make in a democracy are autonomous and endogenous. In reality, we know that strong attachments, some of them pre-existing attachments to party, rooted in lineage, ethno-regional ties, religion, and other such identities, often make large populations of our citizens, possibly upwards of 80% between the two parties, just immovable. Right? So they will stick with one or the other party no matter what. No matter the decline in government, no matter the decline in service, there is no switching. So for them, exit doesn't quite come about. Moreover, such partisans, and that's how I would call them, often have no interest or desire to change the status quo or how the system works, just as long as their parties continue to take turns in power in 8-year intervals. Voice, when it is used by such partisans, is only used opportunistically when their rivals are in power and only to enhance their own party's prospect of returning to power, not to change the democratic or governance quality. So exit looks a bit interesting when you don't have real choice in a democracy, when you have a duopoly with very little or no product differentiation. The real crisis of citizenship in contemporary Ghana, however, is the fact that beyond voting, there is generally very little voice in the sense of active citizenship and participation in the various democratic institutions with intent to change or improve the workings or outcomes of the system. So the kind of active citizenship I've described, and in terms of the spectrum of options that Akoto exercised, there is very little of that. You ask, but how so? There's a lot of venting on radio and TV. In fact, there is, right? So maybe we'll call that noise, right, as opposed to voice. There's a lot of that also. But just look at exactly how it works, right? So with media houses captured by politicians and parties, various media houses representing, being owned by or representing one or the other party in the spectrum, voice is not that kind of voice I'm talking about. Yes, there's venting, there's some ranting, but they usually cancel out. They cancel out because essentially sometimes also the patterns of the media and the way in which they have bought into the duopoly, right? So all conversations are framed in a duopolistic manner, in a binary manner. It's either NPP or NDC. And then when you have that, it becomes a shouting match, really very little, a lot of heat, but no light, right? So what kind are we talking about? What kind of voice are we talking about? We're talking about the kind of voice that Akoto Ampaw exercised. All of those spectrum of choices, right? Why is it? And we have Afrobarometer data telling us that actually that is very, very low. Public participation is extremely low compared to 81% or 75 plus participating in voting. 5% would join the protest, right? 2 years ago, when the crisis hit, when the economy went through a tailspin, right? When the economy went through a tailspin, a foreign observer who was deeply concerned about what was happening because Sri Lanka had happened, was very concerned and called me. He says, Kwesi, is everything okay here? Is everything safe? And I assured him that everything was safe and that we may have a Sri Lankan crisis, but we have a Ghanaian response. And he felt assured. He felt assured because it was coming from me and he knew that I would tell him the truth. But he was puzzled. He said, exactly why? Because after some months and he didn't see the Sri Lankan response, he called me back. He said, exactly explain this to me. Why is it that this kind of economy, this kind of tailspin, and not a sign of anything, no protest, nothing? So that's the task for me too, right? I couldn't give him a straightforward answer. We had a good conversation, but that's what the data suggests, that we do not do a lot of public participation, not just protesting, calling on parliamentarians, but when you look at the data also on trust in institutions, then you begin to understand some of that. We have, again, Afrobarometer tells us, we have extremely low trust in the institutions of democracy, right? Whether it's parliament, opposition party, ruling party, president, even the courts, the police, very, very low trust, public trust in these institutions, and declining, right? So between 2012 and 2022, for example, trust in Parliament has gone down by 22 percentage points, in the courts by 20 percentage points, in the police by 16 percentage points, in the president by 24 percentage points, just like that. I mean, so there isn't, if you don't trust an institution, and it is that institution that is gatekeeping and going to solve your problem, presumably, how are you going to activate activism dealing with that institution, right? So trust, I think, is one of the answers to the question. But I think Hirschman also, when you put his theory or his framework here, again, it encounters some interesting things. Hirschman probably thinks that, I mean, I know that he's more sophisticated, that probably didn't think it this way, but when you look at it as citizens in a democracy, maybe products and goods and services may be different. But citizens are not a monolith, right? We experience government differently. And especially in a very blatant, unabashed, party-first ideology regime system, right? So we operate the system where the parties are very unabashed about being first and foremost mutual benefit organizations for their members. And they will tell you, but why should we give it to you? Are we also not also Ghanaians? We start with us first. Charity begins at home. So public goods, right? So you may be experiencing very bad government, but actually the political class has managed to find a way in which they use public power and incumbency to divert public resources and opportunities in favor of partisans so that they will be having a different experience from you. So while you are protesting, they're asking you, what is wrong with you? It has never been this good, right? Because they're having a completely different experience of government from what you are experiencing. The party government doesn't serve the citizens generally in that way. Thus, even when there is voice, it is met with often harsh rival counter voice, right? So we invest, when you look at where party investments go, the parties have, I don't know if I know any party policy advisor, but there are lots of party communicators. It's the new profession in our democracy. Party communicators, government communicators, they're all over the place. These are propagandists, and they are putting out a narrative that is basically maybe very different from your reality, right? But that's their job. And the other side is countering them with their own alternative reality. It's basically, that's how the voice is working on the ground. So, but if you are getting government jobs, not through merit, but because of partisan criteria, you are getting government scholarships because of partisan criteria, you are getting government contracts because of partisan criteria, then how are you going to say that you and I share the same experience of bad government? You are experiencing something different. In fact, even public goods like streets and roads, sometimes are distributed based on such criteria. So you would find that somebody can say, because you don't know any big person. The road to your place is not nice, crowd. Come and see the other guy. He's just two rows behind you. Yeah? You see the road, they've done his fine. You are sitting on TV talking grammar. You see your road. Right? So my experience from that person's experience of government is different. And we do these things. Right? Then protest. Why do we protest so little? There are huge barriers, right? But I think structurally too, there are some points that we need to consider, right? So when you have a very over-centralized state as we do, right? Over-centralized government where everything that is going to be good for the country that must happen cannot happen unless you get the attention of the president who resides only in Accra and in one office. And everything bad that needs to be undone in this country cannot get any traction if you don't get that same person's attention. You are very highly centralized. So when you have to do collective action, protest, where are you going to do it? In Bogoso? If you don't have access to Accra, it will not get political traction. Decision makers don't reside at the local level, right? So you may be feeling the pinch of the problem at the local level, but nobody there can remedy the situation for you. So when you over-centralize government, it increases the cost of protest and other forms of activism that need to get the attention of those who can resolve the problem, right? And of course, when you do that, it shuts out lots of people who cannot access, who don't have access to the center, especially youth and women, who, in fact, if there was more power at the local level, right, within reach of your home, you could go and protest. Those who are disproportionately disfavored in terms of resources would actually probably be more active citizens, right, than they can be now. But there are other protests, there are other barriers that are very, very intentional. And here, heavy-handed policing. Policing, the use of heavy-handed policing and a complicit court system to basically prevent and discourage protest, right? It's almost paradoxical. African governments, I have noticed, sometimes fear protest even more than they fear voting. Because, voting, you can do things with voting, right? And in fact, one of the reasons why switching also doesn't make a whole lot of sense is that there's a lot of vote buying, right? Governments and parties spend lots of money buying votes. It's not easy to buy protests like that, right? You can set up a counter-protest, of course, but a determined protester, can't be bought off that easily. So they prevent it. So government that allow voting prevent protest. It sounds paradoxical, right? The voting is the one that will take you out. But protest, you don't even want protest to happen, right? And this is notwithstanding effort by people like Akoto, who in the early years of our revolution, of our democracy, managed to get the Supreme Court, right? Lawyers managed to get the Supreme Court to rule that citizens have a right to protest. And that doesn't include getting pre-clearance or permission from the police. That is still the law of the land. Notwithstanding that, you can't protest if the police do not want you to protest. So there are real barriers to protest, right? And I've mentioned counter-mobilization by parties. You protest, the most organized force in the country are political parties. That's the most organized force in the country politically. So when they put people on the streets, it's difficult to counter them. You are doing a protest, you have only 50 people, and they bring 1,000 to counter you. What are you going to do? Right? And then there's religion. Right? It plays a very interesting role, appears in different places when we talk about voice. Religion is playing a very interesting role in our politics. Right? Depending on the type of religion, it could say, well, your problems are not with government, just go and pray. Right? Prayer will solve the problem. And so you disengage. You are wasting time going to protest when you should be in church or mosque or seeing the pastor. Because that's where the solution is going to come from according to that theology. Right? So a lot of citizens, they become more on the loyalty side of the thing. Let's just wait and pray and see how things will change. Another angle, I think, in other places that would have been really very good in a democracy is participating in parties. Because parties really have become the conduits through which we recruit our political leadership. So if you want to make change, in many respects, if parties were democratic, deliberative bodies, policy-making bodies about ideas, a lot of people should be going through that. But our parties are not those. They are just election-winning machines that mobilize basically to win elections. And even their internal processes are not democratic. If you want to contest as a member of parliament, some of the criteria would say you have to show that you have nurtured the constituency. Do you understand what that means? Nurtured the constituency as a requirement for becoming a candidate in the party. It means you must have spent money in the preceding 4 years taking care of the party executives and the gatekeepers who are going to make it possible for you to become a candidate. Right? Now, how is that going to encourage many young people, many women, and people without means, but who have serious civic interest? How is that going to encourage them when you have a party system like that? It shuts out a lot of people. So that is not an avenue for them. And in fact, the running for office, as even an independent, Akoto Ampaw did that. He ran for office as a candidate of a party, but in an entrenched duopoly, the cost, the entry barriers are huge. The cost of politics in Ghana is staggering. Staggering. You would be surprised to hear some of the numbers. Presidential, I don't know what it is now, but some years back, CDD did a survey with Westminster Center for Democracy. Over a decade ago, the numbers were, over $100 million. Right? Now it's probably double. Right? Members of parliament spend, and it's not just for the election, you have to almost take care of your constituents, carry them for 4 years. So basically, it's prohibitive. You can't use that channel to get into office to change anything, right? So the structural barriers are real, right? There are these structural barriers. So I think that while Hirschman's formulation, I think, helps us to organize our thinking around these issues, when you put it on the ground and you overlay it on the structure that we have in Ghana, it's very difficult. Then you can understand the low numbers. It's not that, yes, there's some apathy, by all means, right? Especially people who have to fend for themselves. If you go on a protest, Charlie, you come back, there's no water. Water is not flowing. There is doomsday, and you are sweaty. You can't eat. So all of these things, right? So are we then stuck? I don't have an answer to that question, but I think that it is in the long-term sustainable interest of our democracy to unfreeze these parts, especially citizen protest. We must take a very hard look at our attitude towards citizen protest. Because the more you prevent young people from venting, when you don't have options for them, the more things bottle up. I think we should allow protest as much as we can, as long as it is orderly. We should allow protest. We should try not to prevent them. The African population is very youthful. They have a lot of energy. Protest should be allowed for young people to vent. We must reform our political parties. The amount of money in our politics is obscene. I used to be against public funding for parties. Now I'm not. But only on condition that when we take it over, we take over everything. We take over billboards. We take over everything. We script it. And it's done in other African countries. I was in Dakar before the elections, not a single billboard, because they opened the election window a few weeks before election. Ghana has a 4-year election window. The moment you lose election, your billboard stays because you are waiting to come back. It doesn't go anywhere, right? So some of these changes have to be done to liberate voice, because as Hirschman says, that is the political action par excellence. And without that, there is no peaceful alternative to changing course in our democracy. Without that, I don't see any peaceful alternative to changing course. Without that and structural reform of a lot of the institutions we have mentioned, we are setting ourselves on a slippery slope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kwesi. Thank you very, very much. With your indulgence, we'll make a very slight but interesting adjustment to our program. Before we call the discussants to come up here with their responses, and Akunu, with your permission, the great organizer, with your permission, a friend of Akoto Ampaw wants to come and give us a poem. We hope it's not a volume of poems. But Mr. Roland Akusa, who is an alumnus of this university and also of University of Pennsylvania, he says he's now an entrepreneur. We wish he could have made money and financed Akoto Ampaw's exploits. But he says he also doubles as an amateur poet. But the more important thing is that 51 years ago, as a teenager, and together with other students, he joined Sheshe and other university students to construct irrigation canals at Dawenya, I believe during the very early months of Colonel Champon's regime. So, Mr. Akosa, we are all ears.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ode to Freedom in memory of the immortal Tony Sheshe. Ode to Freedom in memory of the immortal Tony Sheshe. When a haunting silence befalls our land, as in a graveyard solitude, not with you, my dear friend, not with a stranger, let alone a foe, I dare share in the incandescent light of everyday banter, of everyday gratitude, waxing, waning, in a welcoming warmth of a people unafraid to share. How often I mumble, but to myself, with no one with whom to talk. I seem like a troubled mind who at my own shadow, into a smile, I beam. You, how often you grumble, but to yourself, with no one with whom to talk. You seem like a muddled mind. When agitated, you shadow box to let off steam. Now, we know his kind of antics, he who forces on us a stern silence. While high on adolescent innocence, we wager when we play at marbles. When a bully overrules a rule, we put up with him in a stoic silence. Still, hit or miss, winning fair and square makes for a good game of marbles. But when might rules the roost, the fabled strong man overrules our choice, as missing the virtues of candor, of valor, of ardor, so upon us imposes his will. Bourgeois vices, says he, so vile, so vain, can't at the pool of a fair choice. But relents when he reckons a legion's indomitable will, wilting his mortal will. Wasn't Asantua, the warrior queen, seemed as playing marbles while her men played possum when a scoffer made demeaning demands? But her ground she stood, such as we wait out a bully at a game of marbles. So too, by a votive will, a people are to wait the strong man's domineering demands. Now a matriarch bears a creed, no sword of a queen warrior, secular, prosecutorial, magisterial. She holds court to protect kith from kin. She abides the doctrine of wolves, populi wolves day, but no ideologue warrior. Now therefore the glory of our people's compact. We the people have staked a claim to freedom's story. As coups spring to life on a dewy African dawn, we enact has coursed through a revitalizing, timeless ritual, our story. Our heralds bear tidings in images as in a mirror held to the face, crooning, owing, eyeing, in cheers, in jeers, in heat, in wind, in rain, in the chill. They beam our people's travails onto our people, into the mind, into the heart, on the face. Still, above the day-long din of shrill voices, lies, freedom stories thrill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Kusa. Now we come to the responses by our two discussants. The first discussant is Professor Georgie Chikata. Professor Georgie Chikata is a distinguished professor of development studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, and an adjunct professor at the Institute of African Studies, this one. Professor Chikata is the immediate past director of this institute, that is where we are holding this anniversary, the Institute of African Studies in the University of Ghana. She has been an active member of the women's movement in Ghana and in Africa since she was a student, and I bear witness to her when I was a little girl with no plaited hair yet, still very active in the movement for democracy and women's rights. So she's quite a pioneer and still looking very youthful. She's a founding member of the Network of Women's Rights in Ghana, NetRight, and also of the Third World Network in Africa. Professor Chikata, we are all ears for you.
Thank you so much, Professor Kakari, for that introduction. I also want to congratulate the Friends of Akoto Ampaw for instituting this lecture. And I noted what the speakers, first speaker said, that we should institutionalize the lecture. I hope Friends of Akoto Ampaw are listening, and I hope that this will happen. I was really grateful when I received the invitation to be discussant, because for me it was an opportunity to reflect on Kwesi Prempeh's lecture, which I knew would basically hit the spot, but also to offer my own perspectives on the civic space and on the life and times of our dear comrade and friend Akoto Ampaw, affectionately known as Sheshe. So this lecture has been wide-ranging. It has discussed the problems of our democratic dispensation. It has shown us very clearly that this model of democracy is suffering from a myriad of problems: economic mismanagement, problematic centralization of power and a distorted local government system, and a failure to address some of the burning issues that we face because of the self-interest of the elites who run the system. Most importantly, I think this lecture has established the importance of engaged citizenship as one of the solutions to the crisis of democracy. Prempeh also brought to life, in a very beautiful way, Akoto Ampaw's example of full-throated and robust citizenship. And for that, I was very grateful. I also noted his critical application of Hirschman's framework on civic engagement. And I particularly was struck by the critical points he made about the ways in which it does not fully apply to our situation. He even went as far as to offer some preliminary solutions to this crisis we have in civic engagement. And I hope that we'll have the chance to hear more of his ideas at another date and engage with them. I, for example, have always thought that civil society should be struggling for proportional representation as the form of government in Ghana, rather than keep this first past the post system. I also think if political parties want to be funded, they must change the way they bring candidates to light. In other systems, we have the list system, which allows for all sorts of disadvantaged and marginalized citizens to participate in our politics and in our elections and to be elected. In South Africa, the fact that we have almost the same number of men and women in the South African parliament, it's not an accident. It's a direct result of the list system. So there are so many ways in which we can begin to improve our democracy and our civic citizenship. Sheshe came of political age in the 70s, and this was a period of great ferment in Ghana. And although Ghana was under military rule, the level of discontent and disintegration of the economy and society was such that civic activism was at an all-time high. The Professional Bodies Association, the TUC, the Students' Movement were all engaged in the struggle to end dictatorship and economic mismanagement on different fronts. Recognizing that protesting corruption and mismanagement was not enough, a group of leftists and social democrats, including Sheshe, formed a broad progressive movement, the New Democratic Movement, known as the NDM, to chart a course of change and transformation for Ghana. When I first met Sheshe in the early 80s at the University of Ghana, where I was an undergraduate student, he was a student leader, a member of the executive committee of the NDM, the anti-imperialist movement, which had ambitions to work for a national democratic revolution in Ghana. The International Students Movement, the workers' movement, and the space created by the 31st December revolution of the early 80s became terrains on which he and many comrades struggled, alongside popular movements for economic emancipation and social justice for all. When Sheshe was detained for over 2 years, between 1987 and 1989, James Fort became his terrain of struggle. As a young lawyer working as part of the now defunct Ghana Association of Democratic Lawyers, we visited a few prisons to document the situation of young persons who had been held in remand for over long periods. At James Fort, Sheshe presented us with his own list of remand cases he wanted us to take up. The Fourth Republic brought liberal democracy, the politics of patronage, a deepening of neoliberalism, but it also created instability at the heart of the nation, which also affected the civic space. Broad, multifaceted movements lost ground to NGOs with more professionalized and specialized approaches to work in the civil space. As well, members of movements such as the New Democratic Movement adapted to this new terrain of struggle. It has resulted in the proliferation of single-issue politics. It has weakened the ability of civil society to mobilize society as a whole and to defend the civic space and civic citizenship. In addition to the points that Kwesi Prempeh made about the crisis of the civil space and the factors responsible for it, I want to point out that the crisis of citizenship has also exposed the false promise of liberal democracy. I think Professor Kakari alluded to that when he asked, what are our political parties for? This, together with the rampaging neoliberalism, has circumscribed civil citizenship into an echo chamber in which citizens are allowed to vent frustrations without redress, with the promise that the next 4 years they are going to be able to change government. And even this little space of frustration is fast shrinking, and Prempeh's lecture demonstrates it very clearly. We've seen the rise in state authoritarianism on one hand, but also the rise of conservative and unaccountable non-state actors on the other hand. We are in this complicated situation where citizens groups are under severe attack, but also are perpetrators or bystanders. Take the media, for example. Attacks on media personnel by party political operatives and the coercive arms of the state have become quite rampant and alarming and should be totally condemned and resisted. However, the media has not shied away from joining lynch mobs to manufacture consensus against the LGBT community, one of the most marginalized and stigmatized communities in our civic space. People with opposing views have been subjected to heavily skewed panel discussions, heckling, gotcha tactics in the media, providing ammunition for their harassment by some of the most conservative and authoritarian segments of our society. The media is so busy in this exercise that there has been no serious scrutiny of the unconstitutionality of Parliament's conduct in passing this bill. Another threat to the civic space is the increasing strength and influence of the chieftaincy institutions, which is increasingly dominated by highly educated professionals needing to burnish their achievements with this added layer of power, made even more powerful by its chameleon-like quality. Many Ghanaians have the mistaken belief that this is a cultural institution which embodies what it means to be Ghanaian, and that it also represents the lowest level of development. You often hear people say that chiefs know what's wrong with their communities, and they are best placed, therefore, to make decisions about development. Using this principle of subsidiarity, some have argued that it is the chiefs who know best what their subjects need. This misuse of subsidiarity has fueled calls for a second chamber in our parliament composed of chiefs, as if we already do not have enough trouble in our democracy. While this has not been successful, chiefs have increased their grip on civic life in all sorts of ways, adjudicating conflicts, issuing punishments such as banishment, fines, and other forms of humiliation to anyone who falls foul of nebulous crimes and misdemeanors. So here we are. Citizens are caught between the contradictory status of being both citizens and subjects, with implications for their rights to free speech, freedom of conscience, association, and personhood. This also has ramifications for economic citizenship. Recent land tenure reforms under the LAP have strengthened the power of chiefs over land and weakened the principles of communal land ownership and fiduciary positions of traditional rulers and turned them into vectors of land grabbing by national elites and transnational corporations. And many of the landless poor now have to rely on share contracts with steep costs that threaten their right to make a decent living and therefore express their economic citizenship. The collusion between the state and the chieftaincy institution to squeeze the civic space can be seen in the current election campaign, and we already heard a lot from our speaker about this. We know that chiefs are not supposed to be involved in partisan politics, but they've been blessing candidates and showing appreciation in all sorts of ways. I believe that women are some of the greatest losers in this alliance among patriarchal forces, the state, non-state institutions, and the family, to circumscribe their citizenship in the name of culture and religion. There are many lessons we can learn from the life and times of Akoto Ampaw. And the lecture made by Prempeh points to one of these, and that's his adaptability and his ability to use different terrains for his lifelong struggle against imperialism and injustice. His activism within the students' movement, within NDM, the workers' movement, in detention, in the courts, and in the NGO world involved different tools, different preoccupations. And it demonstrates the importance of adapting to different terrains, modes, and tools of struggle at our disposal, while being consistent in our commitment to the fight for the most oppressed and marginalized of citizens. The broad range of Akoto Ampaw's lifelong interests is another lesson we can learn. He was interested in the economic fallout of imperialism, the living conditions of the working people, the right to information, keeping the civic spaces open, media freedom, Darfur, Sahrawi Arab Republic, global peace and security. They all point to the power of internationalism and Pan-Africanism, and the importance of avoiding the fragmentation of our struggles, and the value of solidarity in our civic space. His last stand against the anti-LGBTQ coalition is emblematic in this understanding that all struggles involving the most oppressed and marginalized are connected, and they should concern all of us interested in strengthening civic relationships. I was looking at my email records to see what kinds of messages I received from Akoto Ampaw in the last 10 years. I realized that his solidarity with the LGBTQ community did not actually start with the threat of the bill. In response to a message in which someone shared an editorial in Public Agenda, which was titled, "Reject Calls for Homosexual Rights," he wrote, and this was in July 16, 2010. This is really gross and simple. It reflects, I suspect, the Roman Catholic prejudices of the editor, which is paraded around as the time-honored virtues and values of Ghana. If there's one thing we have generally lost as a people, it is our time-honored values and virtues. Everyone fights for himself or herself in the pursuit of material gains. When people start talking about so-called human rights, you know they have no commitment to human rights in general. But it is the call for prosecution of the offense, he puts it in quotes, that is most galling, as it is troubling. Of course, we can expect the religious fundamentalists who are daily threatening to impose their jaundiced views on the rest of us to seize on it and run with it. Questions. So it came to pass 10 years later. In response to another report in the media on Tuesday, 19th July 2011, titled, "The Church Must Love Homosexuals but Hate Homosexuality," in which it was reported that the then Secretary of the Association of Charismatic and Christian Churches, Reverend Gideon Titi Ofe, has said that Christians should love homosexuals but hate the act of homosexuality. Sheshe wrote on 20th July 2011, "This is certainly a more balanced and compassionate approach than the drivel we are being fed in the name of Christianity. Fundamentally, it is based on the recognition of the right of choice. I think we should all find occasion to let our views be heard on this matter." It is not surprising, therefore, that he brought together a group of individuals from the human rights and women's movement to challenge the bill when it was unveiled in 2021. Even though at the start the effort looked like a finger in the dike, it turned a mission that looked like a done deal to impose intolerance, terror, and conservative notions of family on an unsuspecting nation into a serious contest between different visions of democracy in Ghana, which soon broadened to include a respectable range of civil society organizations. Even when he was not on the front lines of a struggle, such as the women's movement of Ghana, he paid attention to our issues and encouraged us, spoke on our platforms, and expressed consistent solidarity with our struggles. Sheshe attended some of the early meetings of the Federation of Ghana Women, an effort led by Techua Menu in the early 80s to organize women in Ghana. I still remember him making the point that we need to understand the basis of women's subordination in society to be able to fight it. He clearly was aware of the fact that one of the preoccupations of the global women's movement in that period was to understand the origins of gender inequalities. Sheshe was also the only one of our comrades who consistently sent us his women comrades greetings every 8th March. Looking at my email record, my almighty email record, I saw about 10 years worth of such greetings, a good habit which he no doubt picked from his days as a leading member of the International Students Movement. And while Sheshe was heroic, courageous, consistent, and undoubtedly one of the most influential leaders of an important strand in left politics in Ghana, for whom leadership was not about amassing possessions for self, friends, and family, I think his biggest strength lay in his recognition of the importance of the collective, his unwavering commitment to organization, and his consistency in nurturing and supporting young cadre to continue to fight for a fairer world. To honor his legacy, I think we need to renew our movements with a new generation of Sheshes who can apply these lessons to strengthening civic citizenship. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Georgie, for bringing up all of those vital dimensions and also adding to our experiences of Sheshe other aspects of his life as a political, social justice activist. The last discussant is Mr. Suleiman Abraima. Mr. Abraima is the Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa. He obviously is the youngest among the speakers this morning and may also be the one with not a very long experience in relation to working with or associating with Akoto Ampaw. So, and being a young person, we hope you also remind us old folks what this democracy is all for young people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Chair, and good morning to everyone. I think it is fair to say that when you have the honor of being invited to speak in the midst of 3 distinguished professors, and you happen to be the last person to be called to speak, perhaps it's fine to simply say thank you so much for inviting me and then taking your seat. Or basically saying, with all that said, I have nothing more useful to add. But given the honor and the privilege of being invited, and of course, sitting through this and listening to the very educative presentation by Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, I cannot but say a few things. I would want to start by saying that my last encounter with Uncle Sheshe, as we used to call him, was in relation to a defamation suit that had been filed against the 4th Estate, which is a project of the Media Foundation for West Africa. And this suit was in London, far away in London, by a pastor who claimed a report titled Darkness in the Lighthouse, how a non-retired bishop got paid over £300,000 ex gratia. And the bishop had sued us, saying, well, we had defamed him for the publication and all of that. So I had to call Uncle Sheshe, and I had to call Professor Kakari to find out whether at long last he was using a mobile phone. Because all along I knew he was not someone who was using a phone. And fortunately at that time I could reach him on the phone. So I called him, and then he said, oh, is that so? Can you send me a brief of this case, a non-legal perspective of the case? So we put together something and sent to him. And then he said, are you sure these are all the facts? We said, yes. He said, but how can somebody institute such a foolish case? But anyway, we have to defend it. So, but it's a difficult one because it's in London, Okay, I'm going to put you in touch with a friend. So send this to him, and let's see what happens. Well, to cut a long story short, eventually the matter was settled at the instance of the people who filed the case against us. And in the end, they had to actually bear our legal cost and all of that. So that was my last encounter with Sheshe. And of course, before then, I had the privilege of meeting him on different occasions, the RTI struggles and all of that. So sitting through here, as a young man, I am saying, okay, one day, everyone will be gone. What would I do so that I would also be remembered the way Sheshe is being remembered? And I think that, for me, that has been the reflection. So back to Professor Prempeh's presentation, very educative. And I see it as a complete diagnosis, evaluation, and a prescription for our sick democracy. And a number of things have been raised, including the point he makes about we haven't gotten to a situation of a choiceless duopoly. And many continue to raise this question. Who do I vote for? Oh, I don't like this one, I don't like this one. But if I vote for this one, they won't win. If I choose this, they won't win. And this reminds me of Hassan Ayariga, who is from the Boku area where I come from. And anytime there is a funeral or a gathering of people from that community here in Accra, he uses it as a campaign platform. And he always ends by saying, don't let anyone deceive you that if you vote for me, I won't win. Vote for me to see whether I will win or I will not win. So it's indeed a problematic situation where if you listen to the campaign now, perhaps you would hear more sounds and more music than policies that are being put out, and a lot more promises here and there. Indeed, that is why if you take the biggest problem of Galamsey, which is destroying our environment, destroying our future, both parties are shying away from touching on it. As he said, it's about we don't want to lose votes. And I have friends on both sides who say, what can 3 months do? We are left with just 3 months. You know, how can they destroy the whole thing? After 3 months, after election, we'll make sure everything is restored. Do you know there are about close to 2 million people involved in Galamsey? And I should say it and lose the votes. So I think it's great that Prof. Prempeh brings that up. Then, of course, the point about active citizenship and the issue of voice. And he makes the point about at some point we feel there is voice, but of course the opportunistic use of the voice, where you listen to radio and it's not about the policies that are being analyzed, but just basically about this is our party and whatever about it is good. That's not our party and whatever about it is a bad thing. And it's quite a difficult situation. For example, at the Media Foundation, every election period we do monitor, you know, commentary in the media, how people are using language and so on and so forth. And we've gotten to a point where the people you name and shame are proud to use your report as their claim to fame. To basically say, look, we are the people fighting for our party, and look, our names are out there. You know, people like Mugabe on Power FM would highlight it and say, oh, the previous one, they said I was number 1, now I'm number 3, you know, and Wontumi has taken over. So it's an interesting thing. I think that's where we've gotten to where, even though we have a multiplicity of media organizations, it's not about the issues, it's about, you know, insult, attacks, and what people think can help them gain traction within their media ecosystem, I mean, within the politics of our country. Then, of course, I work in the media sector, and the media aspects around the media came up. Right now, we have over 700 radio frequencies that have been issued by the NCA, out of which about 600 radio stations are active, more than 100 television channels are active, and of course there are, you know, hundreds, if not thousands, of social media platforms that are being used for broadcast, you know, of political sentiments and all of that. I think that the most unfortunate thing is that we've done this over the years since 1994 without any regulation. There's really no regulation to deal with the broadcast sector. And the NMC, the NCA, so far, I think the NMC will basically say, well, there's little that we can do within the space. And the broadcasting bill, the processes have been in the works since, what, the last 2 decades, almost 30 years. And yet frequencies are being given away. I believe that one of the fundamental reasons why FM stations, their coverage had to be reduced to 40-kilometer radius was essentially to be able to get more frequencies to continue the parceling out. So that's another issue that we have to deal with. But what was quite intriguing for me was the issue of trust and how that, as Prof said, may be the reason why people may not be that much active. In other words, if you look at the Afrobarometer data, it shows that trust in parliament, very low, as Prof said, in the judiciary, getting lower. The presidency, I think, is even the highest in terms of the drop, the police, and all of that. And one would have assumed that if people don't trust the system, then what to do is to maybe begin to react and to act against the system so that you assert yourself and get what is needed. But quite strangely, that appears to be a reason why people are perhaps less active. And then the point about different experiences among different people in terms of the quality of governance and the dividends of governance, that was brought up. And it reminded me about a situation in one of the constituencies in the country where there is an ongoing rehabilitation of, roads within the community, gutters, culverts being built, and so on. And they've chosen to do that predominantly in the area that they feel they have the major support from. Now, the tipper trucks that are working on these construction have to move out and go and get, the soil for the filling and all of that. And then yesterday, somebody calls me to say, well, the areas where the sand and so on are being fetched, the people are saying they won't allow the tipper trucks to come and fetch them because they are not beneficiaries of the construction. And already they were protesting. Now, why are the things being concentrated in a particular area and we are not benefiting? You speak to the people and they say, well, even if we do it for them, they won't vote for us. So we want to consolidate, our votes in the area. So that's certainly another critical issue. And then, of course, Prof highlights the point about the literal collapse of our local governance system. Now we have DCEs, but they will tell you, look, even KVIPs are being awarded from Accra. Even motorbikes for, a few people will be awarded from the ministry in Accra, and then it will be delivered to you, but it will be registered as part of your common fund. So when you look at your common fund allocation, you will see it there, but it's already been utilized to procure certain things for you. So I think the presentation, of course, raises a number of issues for us to ponder about. The redefinition of our democracy, I think that's quite interesting. Government for the party, of the party, and by the party, instead of, the people, for the people, and by the people. And that's the reality. That's where we are now. It's about the the partisans. If MPP is there, the beneficiaries to a large extent are the folks who are within. And that is why, for example, you look at the National Service, the Scholarship Secretariat, and you look at the beneficiaries. Party chairman, children and relatives of party chairmen, MPs, ministers, and all of that. Then when it is revealed, they say, oh, why? Are they not Ghanaians? Well, but the mechanism is established to benefit needy but brilliant people. But you have somebody who got 3.97 GPA, first class, wanted 4,000, to pay part of his MPhil fees, and was denied. And yet somebody who got a pass has $30,000 to do a master's outside the country. And then you look into it, and it is the son of a regional chairman of the party. Somebody who is, able to buy 300 and something vehicles for the party, has the daughter, getting scholarship to pursue further studies. So, this is a clear illustration of the point that Prof makes about, who benefits from the duopoly that we are in. I think as I was listening, three things came up. The issues of our institutions of democracy, the judiciary, parliament, the executive, the police, and the NCCE, for example. It is the least funded institution in our country, and perhaps the most important, if you look at the constitutional responsibilities for the NCCE. But even towards elections, they are struggling. I remember during COVID, a lot of people were saying, oh, what is the NCCE doing? What is the NCCE doing? Then if you speak to them, they will tell you, all our buses, all our cars are broken down. Eventually, they got certain cars allocated to them from the Jubilee House, and after COVID, all those cars were retrieved. I think we need to begin to talk about these critical institutions and the role that they have to play. The other thing, of course, is money. And now money is everything. You know, if you are not positioning yourself in a way to be able to make money, then perhaps you are living in a different country and all of that. But central to all this, I believe, is the whole question of values. As a country, where lies our values? Do we really have values now? And I think without that, it will be difficult to really deal with the challenges that we face. But Prof, of course, ended by saying that, well, he doesn't have solutions, but I think he prescribed quite a few. The first that I want to highlight, the point about allowing citizens to express themselves. And increasingly, if you look at the press freedom rankings and all of that, we are going down, even though people dispute it. Oh, it's not real. They've changed the methodology. That was the narrative from our government people. It's because they've changed their methodology. They've changed it from the previous one. And I said, did they change it only for Ghana? If they changed it globally and other countries are doing well, why do you think that you are a victim of the new methodology? The reality is that freedom of expression is certainly not as it used to be. And I think it is important that, as Prof highlighted, we do that. The reform to political parties, I don't know how we're going to do it though. It's a major thing that has to happen, but I don't know if it is possible. Because the structures and the mechanisms that have been put in place is essentially to benefit those who are there. And I don't know if those changes would happen. Reducing monetization in politics. Again, I don't know how we can get that done. And then, of course, the issues about the structural reforms to our institution. Now, to end, I just want to say that, in my view, perhaps we started a project called Democracy, a democracy project in 1992. But we did so with a project document that was essentially intended to protect and benefit those who were in power then. And we did so with a document that did not have anything about results metrics, anything about indicators of results, anything about monitoring and evaluation, anything that will guide us to know whether we are making progress or not making progress. And we didn't have anything in there in terms of sustainability. And it appears, even though there was no time frame for this project, it seems to me that if we are not careful, the time for that project to end perhaps is quite close. And therefore, we need to reevaluate the document. That is why people talk about the need to look at the Constitution again, which for me is a project document. The need for us to begin to look at it. And as those who did the review suggested, to move it from a political constitution to a development constitution that benefits everyone. Without that, I believe maybe we'll continue to see a deterioration rather than an improvement of the situation that we find ourselves in. So once again, thank you very much, Prof, for the very erudite presentation and the education, and I'm grateful for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sule. Akunu, can we get some chairs here? No, 3 chairs there from. Oh, here, the ones here. But I have only 1 chair. I don't have 2 chairs. A person Mubaha. And a person Mubaha. Yeah. Okay. Whilst we are getting the stage here ready, please, can you stand up and just stretch for a few seconds? All of us, we've been sitting down for a while, and If you can, just get up and stretch your back. Okay? Let's please take your seats again.
Let me take that one today.
Ago, please take your seats again. Please take your seats again for the general discussion, please. Please take your seats again. Hello. Hello, take your seats again. Please take your seats again. Can I mention names? Audrey. Audrey Techua, please take your seats. Techua no man yes how. Oh, said open commodity. Now open commodity now see me move here. What could be done? What really can we do to straighten things up, to improve the situation? And that's, well, one of the reasons we are here, to contribute to enlightening ourselves and to see if we can begin to reflect on how to improve our democracy. I think it was Karl Marx who said at one point that the philosophers have interpreted the world. What is left is to change it. All the time, we talk a lot, we discuss a lot. What can we do to change things? We hope this general discussion that you are all going to be involved in will help us understand the situation even more and better, and hopefully we can also come up with some ideas. I think, as the speakers emphasized, Akoto Ampaw's life included, of course, serious intellectual understanding of things, but above all, his activism, I think, was primed on organization. He was always involved in activities that were fostered by organization. he had no qualms about coalition building, bringing different people from different sectors together to pursue causes. And I think that without organization, we can wail, moan, cry, whatever, we are not going to make much progress. So, friends, ladies and gentlemen, this is the time for all of us to discuss.
All right, so there you've been watching the very first of the yearly lectures by the Friends of Akoto Ampaw. Anthony Akoto Ampaw, of course, a legend in the legal fraternity of Ghana. And this lecture has been, the keynote speaker was Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, and you heard also Professor Kakari as well there, and Suleimana Brahima, as well as Prof. Georgie as well there, Georgie Chikata speaking there as well. So you'll be watching this lecture, and keep watching ChannelOne TV.